Dr. Harold Voss grabbed Mia's wrist so hard she felt the bones compress. He yanked her arm away from the syringe, twisted it backward and physically shoved her, into the metal supply cart behind her. The crash echoed through the entire trauma bay. Every resident froze. A dying man lay between them, monitors screaming, blood soaking the gurney, and Harold Voss was not looking at his patient. He was looking at her. His finger came up 1 inch from her face. "You are fired. You are nothing. Get her out of my hospital." And nobody in that room moved to stop him. If that made your blood boil, you are not alone. Welcome. And before we go any further, please take just a second to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened that night at Mercy General Hospital in Northern Virginia is something nobody who was there will ever forget. The night of October 14th started like every other Tuesday night shift at Mercy General. Quiet in that specific way that veteran nurses have learned never to trust. The kind of quiet that sits too still, that breathes too shallow, that feels less like peace and more like the world holding its breath before something breaks. Mia Parker had been a nurse at Mercy General for 2 years and 7 months. She knew the rhythms of this place the way a musician knows a song. Not just the melody, but the spaces between the notes. She knew which hallway lights flickered after midnight, which elevator took an extra 3 seconds to close, which vending machine in the East Wing would give you your chips without taking your dollar. She knew the residents who panicked under pressure, and the attendings who went cold. She knew the patients who cried quietly and the ones who screamed to mask it. What she did not talk about, what she had spent 3 years making sure nobody at Mercy General would ever think to ask about, was who she had been before this place. Before the scrubs, before the soft voice and the clipboard, and the careful way she moved through rooms like she was trying not to take up too much space. Mia Parker, as far as anyone at Mercy General knew, was a rookie. Competent, yes. Diligent, absolutely. But rookie, young, unremarkable. That was the plan. That was the point. She was at the nurses' station on the 3rd floor at 1:34 in the morning when her radio crackled. Trauma incoming, Bay 1, ETA 4 minutes, male, approximately 45, unconscious, blunt force trauma to the head, possible internal bleeding, multiple lacerations, unknown cause, unknown identity, paramedics reporting no ID on the patient. No ID. Mia's pen stopped moving on her clipboard. She did not know why that detail snagged something in her chest. There were lots of reasons a person could have no ID. Homeless, robbery victim, accident. But something about the way the paramedic's voice had paused before saying unknown identity, that half-second hesitation, made her set her clipboard down and start walking toward the elevator. She told herself she was just going to observe. She told herself she was curious, nothing more. She was lying to herself. The ambulance bay doors blew open 3 minutes and 47 seconds later. Mia was standing near the edge of the trauma bay, back against the wall, arms folded the way nurses who are technically off duty but can't stay away tend to stand. She watched the paramedics roll the gurney in hard and fast, calling out vitals the way they'd been trained. Loud, clipped, efficient. But there was something underneath the professionalism, a tightness, an urgency that felt different from the normal urgency of a trauma call. The man on the gurney was big, even unconscious, even with blood matting his hair to one side of his face, even with the oxygen mask pressing down over his nose and mouth. There was something about the way he was built that told you this was not a man who had ever been soft in his life. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, were the hands of someone who had spent decades doing things with them that required absolute precision and absolute force. His jaw, even slack with unconsciousness, looked like it had been set in granite. Dr. Harold Voss swept into the trauma bay with the energy of a man who believed that his entrance into any room was a gift to everyone present. He was 53 years old, silver-haired, with the specific kind of confidence that comes not from competence alone, but from years of never being challenged by anyone who outranked him. He was a good doctor. Mia had watched him work, and she knew he was technically skilled. But Harold Voss was also a man who had confused respect with fear so long ago that he no longer remembered there was a difference. "What have we got?" he said, snapping on gloves. The paramedics gave their report. Voss began his assessment. The residents fell into position around the gurney like satellites orbiting a planet. Mia stayed at the edge, watching. She watched the vitals on the monitor. She watched the rhythm of the man's breathing, shallow, irregular, the kind of pattern that whispered about increased intracranial pressure to anyone who had seen it before in the field. She watched the angle of Voss's hands as he began his neurocheck, and something in her stomach tightened. And then the man's head turned, just slightly, just 2 or 3 degrees to the right, and Mia saw it. It was small, half the size of a postage stamp, tucked just behind his left ear, partially hidden by his hairline. A tattoo. Not decorative, not personal, military. Specifically, and Mia would have known this tattoo in total darkness, would have known it from the shape and placement alone. It was the insignia of SEAL Team 6, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU, the most elite special operations unit in the United States military. Her breath left her body. She had not seen that tattoo in 3 years. She had told herself, actively, deliberately, every single day for 3 years, that she would never see it again. That world was gone. That Mia Parker was gone. She took one step forward without meaning to. Across the gurney, one of the junior residents, a second-year named Trevor Chen, who was genuinely trying his best, was preparing a syringe. Mia's eyes went to it. She recognized the medication. She read the dosage on the label from 6 feet away, and every nerve in her body fired at once. It was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a small miscalculation. Wrong in the way of a potentially fatal error, specifically for a patient presenting with the neurological profile this man was showing. With possible intracranial pressure, with this heart rate, with this specific combination of symptoms, that drug at that dosage could drop his blood pressure to a level from which he would not recover. She moved. She did not think about protocol. She did not think about her position, her rank, her carefully constructed ordinary life, the 2 years and 7 months she had spent becoming invisible. She thought about the tattoo behind his ear, and the syringe in Trevor Chen's hand, and the 5 seconds between now and irreversible. She crossed the trauma bay in 3 steps, and she caught Trevor's wrist before the needle reached skin. "Don't," she said. Her voice was quiet, completely calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from relaxation, but from training so deep it has become instinct. That dosage with his neuropresentation will crash his pressure. He'll code within 8 minutes. The trauma bay went silent the way rooms go silent when something unexpected happens. Not gradually, not politely, but all at once, like a switch being thrown. Trevor Chen stared at her. His mouth opened and closed. Dr. Harold Voss looked up from his assessment. He looked at Mia. He looked at her hand on Trevor's wrist. And Mia watched his face move through surprise and into something else entirely, something cold and sharp that she recognized immediately as wounded pride. "Nurse Parker," his voice was very controlled, very deliberate. "Remove your hand." "Dr. Voss, the dosage is contraindicated for—" "I said remove your hand." Mia released Trevor's wrist, but she did not step back. "The patient is showing signs of increased ICP. That medication at that dose will cause rapid vasodilation, and he doesn't have the pressure to compensate. You need to—" "Do you have a medical degree?" Voss said, still controlled, still deliberate. Something was building behind his eyes that Mia recognized as far more dangerous than anger. It was humiliation looking for a target. No, but do you have a license to practice medicine in the state of Virginia? No, but I have. Then your opinion, Voss took a single step toward her, and his voice dropped in a way that was somehow louder than shouting would have been, is irrelevant. In this bay, in this hospital, at this moment, he turned to look at the rest of the room, at the residents, at the nurses, at every single person watching, and he said it for all of them to hear. You are a nurse, a junior nurse. You were not called to this bay. You were not assigned to this case, and you just physically interfered with a physician's treatment. Get out. Mia did not move. Dr. Voss, I am asking you to please reconsider the dosage. Just look at his security. Voss's voice cracked like a whip. He turned away from her completely, dismissing her with the physical act of turning his back. A gesture that said more than any words could. I want this woman removed from this bay immediately. Dr. Voss. This was Janet Hale, the charge nurse, stepping forward, her face caught between professionalism and something that looked a lot like guilt. Maybe we should just... Janet, Voss's eyes moved to her with the precision of a scalpel. Unless you'd like to join her, I suggest you step back. Janet stepped back. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Big men, both of them. They looked at Mia and she looked at them, and for one long moment, nobody moved. Mia's eyes went back to the man on the gurney, to his face, still in gray beneath the oxygen mask, to the hand still resting at his side, and to the small tattoo behind his ear that nobody else in this room had seen or recognized or understood. She thought about what that tattoo meant, who it meant he was, and she stepped back, not because Harold Voss had told her to, not because of the security guards. She stepped back because she knew that causing a scene right now, fighting, arguing, escalating, would cost more seconds than she had. She needed to think. She needed to get out of this room and think. She walked out of the trauma bay without looking at anyone. In the hallway, she stood against the wall and pressed both hands flat against the cool painted concrete and breathed. Around vitals she had memorized in 3 seconds of observation, cross-referenced against treatment protocols she had not had cause to use in 3 years, stacked against the specific pharmacology of the medication Trevor Chen had been preparing, mapped against the physiological profile of a man presenting with exactly the symptoms she had seen. She gave him 22 minutes, maybe 25 if his constitution was exceptional, and everything about his physical presentation suggested it was. 25 minutes before that medication turned a critical condition into a fatal one. She was still running numbers when Janet Hale pushed through the trauma bay door and stood in the hallway looking at her. Janet was 61 years old and had been a nurse for 35 of them. She had a face that had learned, over 3 decades, to show nothing in the moment and everything later, in private. Right now her face was showing something. He's going ahead with it, Janet said quietly. I know. Mia, Janet took a step closer. Her voice dropped further. You know I can't back you on this. He's the attending. I know, Janet. What you did in there, I know what I did. Mia turned to look at her, and Janet, who had been a nurse for 35 years and had seen more varieties of human expression than most people encounter in 10 lifetimes, went very slightly still. Because the person looking back at her from Mia Parker's face was not the quiet, careful, unremarkable junior nurse she had worked with for 2 years and 7 months. The eyes were the same color, the face was the same face, but whoever was behind those eyes right now had not been born in a hospital or trained in a nursing program. Janet, I need you to do something for me. Mia, I need you to pull his intake file and look at his right forearm. There's going to be a scar pattern on the inside of his forearm, a series of 3 parallel scars, approximately 2 centimeters apart. If you see that pattern, I need you to call it in as a possible combatant identification and request military verification before any further treatment. Janet stared at her. That is completely outside protocol. I know. That could get me fired. Yes. Why would I do that? Because if I'm right about who he is, Mia said, and that medication goes in, and he dies, then in about 6 hours this hospital is going to be surrounded by people who are going to want to know why nobody flagged the identification markers of a decorated United States military officer. And you want to be the person who tried to flag it, not the person who didn't. Janet looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" she said, not rhetorically, with genuine, careful uncertainty, as though she were asking a question whose answer she was no longer sure she wanted. Mia said nothing. She turned and walked down the hallway. She made it as far as a nurse's locker room before Dr. Voss appeared behind her. She heard him before she saw him. The specific cadence of footsteps moving fast, with the specific energy of someone who has waited just long enough for an audience to dissipate before delivering a final verdict. She turned around. He was holding a single sheet of paper. He held it the way people hold things when they want the object itself to communicate power. At arm's length, slightly extended, the way you might hold evidence. Nurse Parker, his voice was smooth now. The controlled fury from the trauma bay had settled into something quieter, and in its quietness, more absolute. This is a notice of termination, effective immediately. The grounds are insubordination, interference with a physician's treatment, and physical contact with a staff member during active treatment. That is Dr. Chen's wrist, in case you require clarification. He set the paper down on the bench beside her without breaking eye contact. Your badge and hospital ID are to be surrendered to security within the hour. Your personal effects will be boxed and available at the main desk by 8 a.m. You are not to return to any clinical area of this building. Mia looked at the paper. She looked at his face. In the 2 years and 7 months she had worked at this hospital, she had worked hard at being forgettable. She had worked hard at being the kind of person whose eyes slide past. Someone present but unremarkable. Competent but quiet. Someone who could stand in a room and leave it without changing the temperature. She had been very good at it. She looked at Harold Voss's face, and something in her was very tired all of a sudden. Not scared, not shamed, just tired. "Dr. Voss," she said, and her voice was perfectly even. "In approximately 20 minutes, the patient in Trauma Bay 1 is going to experience a cardiovascular event secondary to the medication currently being administered. When that happens, the people who come looking for answers are going to find a lot of them. I hope you like your answers." She picked up her jacket from her locker. She did not pick up the termination notice. She walked out. The hallway was almost empty at this hour. One orderly with a cart moving slowly at the far end. The overhead lights doing their quiet, institutional fluorescent buzz. Mia walked past the elevator, past the supply closet, past the family waiting area with its rows of orange plastic chairs and its perpetually tuned to nothing television. She walked to the end of the hall and pushed through the door to the stairwell and stood for a moment on the landing between floors, in the particular silence that stairwells hold. She pulled out her phone. She had not used this particular contact in 3 years. She had not deleted it either. Some part of her had always known, in the way you know things you refuse to think about directly, that she might need it again. She dialed. It rang twice. A voice answered. Flat, professional, instantaneous. The voice of someone who had been awake and waiting. Authentication required. "November, Echo 7 Foxtrot 22 Alpha, Mia said quietly. "This is Phoenix. I need a patient identification confirmation. Male, early to mid-40s, DevGru insignia, left posterior auricular placement. I believe he's colonel level or above. He's in critical condition at Mercy General, Fairfax County, Virginia. The attending physician is administering contraindicated medication as of approximately 18 minutes ago." Silence on the line. Then, "Hold, Phoenix." She held. 30 seconds. 40. The stairwell was very quiet. Somewhere far above her, A door opened and closed. The voice came back, tighter now. Something in it had changed. What is the current patient status? Unknown. I was removed from the bay. Another pause, shorter this time. Phoenix, the voice was completely different now. Not flat, not professional, urgent. Do not leave that building. The line went dead. Mia stood in the stairwell for exactly 3 seconds. Then she moved. She was back in the main corridor on the ground floor when she heard it. A sound that reached through the walls of the building, through the insulation in the glass and the institutional concrete. A deep mechanical thrum that she would have recognized anywhere, in any context, at any hour. Rotors, not a medical helicopter. The acoustic signature was completely different, heavier, more powerful, with a specific harmonic that came from a very particular kind of aircraft. She had been on the ground beneath that sound 100 times. She had jumped out of aircraft that made that sound, military Black Hawk. And from the volume and the rate of approach, it was descending. Here, now. She did not run. Running in a hospital at 2 a.m. draws attention. She walked fast, which is different. She walked fast to the window at the end of the corridor and looked out and saw it. The Black Hawk coming down into the parking lot with the specific, deliberate precision of military pilots who have landed in places considerably more complicated than a Virginia hospital parking lot. Its searchlights swept the lot once, twice, and then it touched down with the professional economy of something that had done this 10,000 times. The doors opened before the rotors had finished slowing. 6 men got out. Even in the dark, even at distance, even dressed in the civilian-adjacent tactical clothing that Special Forces personnel sometimes wear when they are trying not to be entirely obvious. Mia knew what she was looking at. She had worked alongside men built exactly like this. She had been in rooms with men whose silence sounded exactly like this. She knew the way they moved, economical, aware, every footfall deliberate, heads on swivels that looked casual and were anything but. They were heading for the main entrance, and behind them, stepping out of the helicopter last, a figure in a uniform that was definitely not civilian adjacent, that was making no effort whatsoever at subtlety, 4 stars visible even in the parking lot lighting, was a general. Mia's phone buzzed in her hand. A text. No name, no number. Just 4 words. Stay where you are. The 6 operators and the general crossed the parking lot and pushed through the front doors of Mercy General Hospital. And in the lobby, the overnight security guard stood up from his desk with the expression of a man whose entire Tuesday night had just become something he was going to be telling his grandchildren about. Mia stayed where she was. Down the corridor, somewhere near the trauma bay, she heard raised voices. She could not make out the words yet, but she recognized the particular shape of the sound of a situation changing hands, the sound of authority transferring from one set of people to another, rapidly and without much room for negotiation. She heard Harold Voss's voice, elevated, indignant, the voice of a man who was accustomed to being the highest-ranking person in any medical confrontation, and who had just encountered, for possibly the first time in his professional life, a confrontation in which medicine was not the relevant hierarchy. The sound of his voice doing that, sputtering, recalibrating, failing to find the register of authority it was reaching for, was something Mia registered with a feeling she had not expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something simpler and heavier than either of those things. She had been right. She had been right about the tattoo, right about the medication, right about who was on that gurney and what it would mean when the people who cared about him found out where he was and what was being done to him. She had been right about all of it, and it had cost her nothing except a job she had built to be temporary and a life she had built to be invisible. The voices down the corridor were getting louder. Mia took a breath. She straightened her jacket. She looked at her phone. The text was still there. 4 words. Stay where you are. And she looked at the direction of the voices, and she looked at her hands. Her hands were steady, They had always been steady. That was the thing about her hands. They had never once in her life trembled when it mattered. She walked toward the noise. She did not know yet exactly what was coming. She did not know the shape of what the next hours would hold, or what would be asked of her, or what she would be asked to give. 3 years of invisibility, of quiet and smallness and deliberate forgettability. She could feel the weight of all of it, the careful construction of it, the cost of it, sitting in her chest as she walked. But Colonel Ryan Mitchell, whoever he was, whatever he had done, whatever operation had put him on that gurney, was still alive. And the men who had come for him were here. And she had made a phone call and given her authentication code for the first time in 3 years, which meant that somebody, somewhere, had opened a file with her name on it that had been sitting closed and gathering quiet for a very long time. "Stay where you are," the text had said. She rounded the corner into the corridor that led to the trauma bay. 6 operators in tactical clothing were standing in a line outside the bay doors. The general, she could see his face now, older, lined, the face of a man who had given decades to a thing that had taken everything he offered, was speaking in low, precise tones to a hospital administrator who looked like he had been pulled from his bed 20 minutes ago and was still processing the concept of a military general standing in his corridor at 2 a.m. Harold Voss was standing 5 feet back, and he was doing something Mia had never seen him do in 2 years and 7 months of watching him navigate every professional confrontation with absolute certainty. He was standing very still and saying nothing. One of the 6 operators, the one closest to the bay door, positioned with his back to the wall, in the way people position themselves when they are monitoring all entry points simultaneously, turned his head and looked directly at Mia. His eyes were flat and assessing in the way she remembered, in the way that saw everything and showed nothing. He looked at her for 2 seconds, which was a long time for an assessment by someone trained to complete assessments in less than 1. Then he said, to no one in particular, in a voice that was quiet enough not to carry past the group, but directed with the precision of someone who knew exactly who could hear him. "Phoenix is here," and the general turned around and looked at her. And for the first time in 3 years, Mia Parker was seen. The general's name was Brigadier General Thomas Carr, and in 31 years of military service, he had walked into a lot of rooms that didn't want him there. He had walked into rooms in Fallujah and Kandahar, and places whose names never appeared in any report that would ever be declassified. He had walked into congressional hearings and Joint Chiefs briefings, and the kinds of rooms where men in expensive suits decided which wars were worth fighting and which were worth losing quietly. He had never, in 31 years, walked into a room and felt the specific variety of anger that was moving through him right now as he stood in the corridor of Mercy General Hospital at 2:09 in the morning and looked at Mia Parker. Not anger at her. That was the thing. "Phoenix," he said, and he said it the way you say a word you have practiced not saying for a long time, carefully, with the awareness of what saying it costs. Mia stood 6 feet away from him and said nothing. Her jacket was in her hand. She was not wearing her hospital badge. Behind her, the fluorescent hallway lights buzzed their indifferent buzz. "It's been 3 years," Carr said. 2 years, 11 months, and 17 days, Mia said. Her voice was even. "What's his status?" General Carr's jaw tightened. He turned to the operator nearest the trauma bay door, the one who had clocked Mia's arrival first, a man she did not recognize, early 30s, the particular stillness of someone whose reaction time she would not want to test. "Briggs, status," Briggs said without moving from his position. "Stable for now, sir." Dr. Yoon got to him before the medication fully metabolized. She reversed the protocol 12 minutes ago. Mia absorbed that. The tightness in her chest loosened exactly 1 degree. "Yoon is on tonight?" "She is now," Carr said, and something in the way he said it communicated that Dr. Yoon's presence at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday had not been a coincidence. Harold Voss chose this moment to reassert himself. He had been standing 5 feet back in the practiced posture of a man pretending he was not rattled, and he was not succeeding. "General, I want it on record that this hospital followed every—" "Dr. Voss." Carr didn't raise his voice. He didn't turn fully toward Voss. He addressed him the way you address something in your peripheral vision, acknowledging its presence without granting it your full attention. "You had a decorated DevGru colonel in your trauma bay. His identification markers are on file with every major military installation within 200 miles of this city. You missed them, you administered contraindicated medication, and when a member of your staff attempted to prevent that error, you assaulted her." Now he did turn, fully. "So I would strongly recommend that whatever you are about to say to me, you think about very carefully first." The hallway was quiet enough that Mia heard Voss's breath change. She did not look at him. She was watching Carr's face, watching the tight calculation behind his eyes, watching him run the same kind of assessment she was running, cataloging variables, assigning probabilities, deciding what to say and what to hold. "What operation?" she asked. Carr looked at her. "He's not here by accident," Mia said. "Nobody shows up to a Virginia civilian hospital with DevGru Inc. and no ID by accident. What was the operation?" "That is classified." "Is the operation still active?" Carr paused, one beat too long. "General," her voice dropped, "is the operation still active?" "We need to move this conversation," Carr said. He looked at Briggs. "Conference room, now." Briggs peeled away from the wall and moved down the corridor with the efficiency of someone who did not need to be told twice or given directions. The other 5 operators held their positions, 2 at the trauma bay door, 1 at each end of the corridor, one whose role Mia could not immediately identify from his positioning, which told her his role was specifically not to be identified. Carr turned to the hospital administrator, a small man named Gerald Park, whose name badge identified him as Night Operations Director, and whose face identified him as a man who had not signed up for this when he took the job. "Mr. Park, this corridor needs to be cleared of all non-essential personnel. I need an isolation order on the patient in Trauma Bay 1, and I need it documented as a federal security measure, which means it goes through my office, not yours. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Gerald Park nodded twice, very fast. "I also need the security footage from the trauma bay from 1:34 a.m. through the present transferred to this drive." Carr produced a small black device from his jacket and set it in Park's palm. "Within the next 15 minutes. I don't need to explain why." "No, sir. Yes, sir." Park looked at the drive and then at Carr and then at Mia, and his expression said clearly that he was reassembling his understanding of what this night was and had been and might still become. Carr began walking. Mia fell into step beside him, not behind, beside, which was the position of someone who understood exactly what kind of conversation was about to happen and refused to enter it from a subordinate posture. Carr noticed. He said nothing about it. They passed 2 nurses who had materialized near the supply station, drawn by the irresistible gravity of something happening. Both nurses looked at the general, at the operators, at Mia, and at each other, in that order, with the rapid recalibration of people absorbing an event that doesn't fit any existing category. Janet Hale was one of them. Mia met her eyes for exactly 1 second as she passed. Janet's face held the specific expression of a woman who had made a decision in the last 40 minutes that she was still evaluating the consequences of. The 3 parallel scars on Ryan Mitchell's forearm. Mia knew from Janet's face that she had looked, that she had found them. Janet gave one small, almost imperceptible nod. Mia looked away and kept walking. The conference room was at the end of the administrative corridor, past the offices that were dark at this hour, and the bulletin board covered in compliance notices, and the photograph of the hospital's founding that had hung in the same spot for so many years that everyone had stopped seeing it. Briggs was already inside when they arrived, standing at the head of the table with a laptop open and a secure line establishing. Mia recognized the encryption protocol from the sound the connection made, a specific sequence she had heard in field operations centers on 3 different continents. Carr closed the door. He did not sit down. Neither did Mia. They stood on opposite sides of the table and looked at each other in the particular way of 2 people who have history that neither of them has fully processed and are now being asked to function professionally inside of that. Mitchell was running an extraction, Carr said. Not a question, not an explanation. A statement that was also a door being opened. Mia waited. Asset recovery, deep cover. The asset had been in place for 14 months, and the window to bring him out opened 48 hours ago. Mitchell ran the extraction personally. Carr's voice was even, but his hands, flat on the table, were pressing down harder than was necessary. The operation was compromised. We don't know at what level. Mitchell got the asset out, but he took the hit that was meant for the asset. His team got him to the nearest civilian facility because taking him to a military installation would have confirmed the operation's location to the people who compromised it. And those people, Mia said slowly, don't know where he is right now. They didn't, Carr looked at her. The ambiance was called in on an open frequency by your paramedics, unencrypted, standard procedure for civilian emergency services. Mia processed that. So if the people who compromised the operation were monitoring civilian emergency frequencies in this area, then they know he's here. Carr's voice didn't change. Yes. The room was very quiet. How long? Mia asked. We assess 40 to 70 minutes before they can mobilize and reach this location, if they have assets in the region. Do they have assets in the region? Carr's silence was its own answer. Mia pulled out a chair and sat down, not because she needed to rest, but because she needed to think, with her feet on the ground. Her mind was doing the thing it did, the rapid, almost involuntary triage of information, the sorting of variables by urgency and probability, the construction of decision trees that branched and rebranched in real time. It was a cognitive process she had spent 3 years trying to turn off, like trying not to breathe. His condition, she said. What's Yoon saying? Stabilized, but he needs surgery. There's a bleed she can't manage conservatively, and this facility doesn't have the neurosurgical capacity to operate without risk of. Then you can't move him, Mia said. Movement increases ICP. If there's an active bleed and you put him in that Blackhawk, you might as well. I know that. Carr's voice was tight. We know that. That is the problem we are currently sitting inside of. You need to secure this facility. We have 6 operators. For a building with 14 entry points, 412 occupied rooms, 3 parking structures, and a loading dock that connects directly to a service road with no barrier. She watched his face. I walked this building for 3 years, General. I know every corner of it. Carr looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't entirely name. Something between relief and grief, and the complicated thing that exists between those 2 states. Why were you here, Mia? He asked, and his voice was different now. Not the general voice, something else, something older. 3 years, this hospital, a nursing badge and a $12 ID lanyard. Why here? It was far enough. From what? She did not answer that. Carr absorbed her silence. He had learned, a long time ago, that Mia Parker's silences were not empty. They were load-bearing. The Pentagon wants you back. The Pentagon disbanded my unit. The situation has changed. The situation changed the night they pulled our mission authorization and left 4 of my people in a field in... Mia, don't. Her voice was quiet and absolute, and it stopped him completely. Do not do the thing where you explain to me why it was necessary. I have heard that explanation. I have heard it in 3 different offices from 4 different people with enough stars on their shoulders to fill a planetarium. I don't need to hear it again. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Then Carr said very quietly, "Two of those four people are on this team. They're in the corridor right now." Mia went very still. "Reyes and Cole," Carr said. "They re-enlisted 8 months ago. They specifically requested assignment to Mitchell's unit." He let that land before he continued. "They asked about you. Both of them. Every time." She stared at the table. Something moved through her chest that she had not been prepared for and did not have a name ready for. "That's not—" She stopped. "That doesn't change what happened." "No," Carr agreed. "It doesn't. Nothing changes what happened. But it does change what's happening right now, tonight, in this building." He leaned forward. "Mitchell is alive because you were here. He is in critical condition in a facility that is about to potentially become a target, and I have 6 operators, 1 compromised nurse, and a general who hasn't run a field operation in 9 years." He paused. "And I have you." Mia said nothing. "Phoenix, don't call me that." But her voice, saying it, had lost some of its edge. A knock at the conference room door. Briggs pushed it open without waiting. The knock had been notification, not request. "Sir, Yoon is asking for a consult. She says the patient is showing secondary neurological symptoms, and she wants another opinion before she makes a decision on intervention." Carr looked at Mia. "I'm fired," Mia said flatly. "Voss terminated me 40 minutes ago." "Voss's authority in this building was superseded by federal jurisdiction approximately 25 minutes ago," Carr said. "He has been informed of this." I bet he loved that. He did not. For the first time, something moved across Carr's face that was almost, not quite, but almost, humor. It was gone in an instant. Dr. Yoon is a good physician. She is not a field medic. She has not treated combat injuries in a trauma environment, and she is reading symptoms that do not match civilian injury patterns. Mitchell needs someone who understands what those symptoms actually mean. Mia stood up. She did not pick up her jacket. She left it on the chair the way you leave something behind when you are committed to coming back. "I want access to his full chart," she said. "Not the admitting chart, the real chart. His medical history, his prior injuries, his field treatment records." "That's classified at—" "Then declassify it. You want my help, I need to see what I'm working with." She walked toward the door. "And I want to talk to Reyes." She was in the corridor before Carr could respond. The 2 nurses who had been hovering near the supply station were gone now, cleared out by Gerald Park, who was apparently more efficient under pressure than his expression had suggested. The corridor had the specific quality of a space that has been made intentionally empty, which is different from a space that is empty naturally. You can feel the effort of the clearing. Mia walked toward the trauma bay. One of the operators at the door, the one on the left, broad-shouldered, with a haircut that said military even when the clothing was trying to say civilian, turned toward her as she approached. She looked at his face. It had been 3 years. He was older. There was a scar along his left jawline that had not been there before. A thin, white line that spoke of something fast and close and survived. His eyes were the same, dark, careful, with a particular quality of eyes that had seen things they were still in the process of sorting. "Reyes," she said. Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes looked at Mia Parker and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "You cut your hair. You got a scar. Occupational hazard." His voice was level, but something in it was not level. Something in it was doing the thing that voices do when they are carrying more than the words being spoken. When there is a weight of other conversations underneath, a weight of 3 years of absence, and whatever he had been doing in those 3 years, and whatever she had been doing, and the enormous, undiscussed space between. "Are you good?" she asked. It was the question they had always used, not "how are you," which was social, but "are you good," which meant something specific, which meant, "Is everything working? Are you operational? Are you here?" Reyes looked at her for 1 more second. "I'm good," he said. "Are you?" "Getting there." She looked at the trauma bay door. Who's in there with Yoon? Cole. He's been in there since we arrived. A pause. He hasn't left. Mia absorbed that. Is Cole? He's good, Reyes said quickly. He's solid, but Mitchell is... He stopped. His jaw moved. Mitchell brought us both back in. After everything, he went to bat for us personally. Went 3 levels up the chain to get our re-enlistment processed when 2 different commanders blocked it. Another pause. He's not just our CO. I know, Mia said. She looked at the door. She looked at Reyes. I'm going in. She pushed the trauma bay door open. The room had been reorganized since she'd been thrown out of it. The chaotic energy of the initial response had settled into the controlled tension of a situation that was being managed but not resolved. Dr. Yoon, small, sharp-eyed, with the compressed energy of someone running on competence and adrenaline, was at the monitoring station, her eyes moving between screens with the rapid data intake of someone processing too many variables simultaneously. And beside the gurney, standing with his arms folded and his back to the door, was a man whose posture Mia would have recognized in total darkness. Tall, lean, the back of his neck showing the same tattoo placement as a colonel, but a different insignia, E7 rank. He turned when she entered. Thomas Cole had a face that had always looked younger than his age, which had occasionally made people underestimate him, which had been their problem. He looked at Mia, and his expression moved through several things very quickly. Surprise, relief, something complicated, and then back to the operational neutral that they had all been trained to wear. Parker, he said. Cole. She moved past him to the monitoring station. Dr. Yoon, I'm Mia Parker. I'm a former combat medic with specific experience treating DevGru operators in field conditions. General Carr has authorized my consultation. Walk me through what you're seeing. Yoon looked at her with the rapid assessment of a physician encountering an unexpected variable. Your nursing credentials are a fraction of what I'm qualified to do, Mia said. Not aggressive, just factual. The secondary neurosymptoms Carr mentioned, show me. For one moment, Yoon held the slight resistance of a professional encountering a claim she could not immediately verify. Then she turned to the screen and started talking, because the patient was what mattered, and she was smart enough to know it. Mia listened. She watched the waveforms on the monitor. She looked at the numbers, and the numbers told a story she had read before. In a field hospital in a country whose name she was not allowed to say, with equipment that cost a fraction of what this bay contained, in conditions that made this calm, fluorescent room look like a spa. He has a secondary contracture injury, she said. The primary impact was lateral, left side, but the secondary damage is anterior. It's not showing classically because his physiology is... She stopped, looked at Cole. How many times has he been treated for TBI? Cole's jaw tightened. 3 documented, probably 2 more undocumented. So his brain has compensatory patterns that are masking the classical presentation. Yoon, what you're reading as stable is actually... Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Carr. 1 line. Threat assessment updated. 50 minutes, possibly less. Mia looked at the monitor. She looked at Ryan Mitchell's face. Still unconscious, still gray, the oxygen mask still moving with his shallow breaths. A man she had never met. A man 6 other people in this building would lay down their lives for without being asked twice. She looked at Yoon. We need to change the protocol, now. And then we need to have a conversation about how we're going to keep this man alive in a building that is about to have a very serious problem. Yoon stared at her. What kind of problem? Cole answered before Mia could. His voice was quiet and completely calm in the way of someone reporting a weather forecast. The kind that comes through doors, he said. The kind that comes through doors. Cole said it the way he said everything, without drama, without inflation, with the flat precision of a man who had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous things in life did not benefit from decoration. Dr. Yoon looked at him, and then at Mia, and Mia watched the physician's face move through the rapid recalibration of someone who had spent her career preparing for medical emergencies and was now understanding that the emergency in this building was not entirely medical. "How serious?" Yoon asked. "Serious enough that we need Mitchell movable within the next 40 minutes, Mia said, "which means the bleed needs to be addressed now, not after we figure out the security situation." She turned back to the monitors. "What's your surgical capacity tonight?" "We have one OR running. Dr. Abrams is in a bowel resection that's been open for 2 hours." "Who else?" "Dr. Park is on call, but he's 20 minutes out." "Get him in now. Tell him it's federal." Use that exact word. Mia was already running the numbers: surgical prep time, anesthesia protocols, the specific complications of operating on a patient with Mitchell's neurological profile and trauma history. "And I need someone to pull his prior surgical records. Cole, does the team have his medical file?" "Briggs has a copy on the secure laptop," Cole said. He was already moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on it. "Mia," he said her name the way you say something you have been waiting to say for a long time and are not sure you're saying correctly. "I'm glad you're here." She didn't turn around. "Get me the file." He left. Yoon was watching her with the particular attention of a physician recalibrating their assessment of another person in real time. "You diagnosed a contra-coup pattern in under 3 minutes from a visual monitor read," she said. "That's not nursing school." "No," Mia agreed. "It isn't." "Who were you?" Mia looked at her. "I was someone who is trying to keep your patient alive. Is that enough for right now?" Yoon held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the monitors. "Tell me what you need." 2:31 a.m. The conversation between General Carr and Harold Voss happened in the hallway outside the hospital director's office, and it was not long. Carr had not requested the meeting. Voss had come to him, still in his surgical gown, still carrying the posture of a man who believed that this situation, all of it, the operators in the corridor, the general, the federal jurisdiction declaration, all of it, was a temporary intrusion on his normal order of authority that would eventually resolve itself in his favor. He had misjudged the room. "I want it on the record," Voss said, "that my treatment decisions tonight were made with the information available to me at the time. I was not informed of the patient's military status. That failure of identification is on the paramedic team and the intake process, not on Dr. Voss." Carr had the specific quality of stillness that very large authority figures sometimes develop. Not stillness as in calm, but stillness as in a system that has already made all its decisions and is simply waiting for the conversation to catch up. In approximately 35 minutes, this facility may come under threat from individuals connected to an active federal operation. When that happens, the safety of every person in this building becomes my responsibility and my priority. He paused. "Your employment status and the question of who is responsible for what happened tonight are matters for a different conversation, on a different day, with people above both of our pay grades. Right now I need you to do one thing." Voss straightened, prepared himself to be asked something important. "Stay out of the trauma bay," Carr said, "and stay away from Mia Parker." The color in Voss's face went through 2 changes. "She is a terminated employee of this. She is the most qualified person in this building to keep that man alive," Carr said, "and that is currently the only qualification that matters to me." He turned away. "Mr. Park will show you to an office where you can wait. I recommend you wait quietly." Voss stood in the corridor alone, and for the first time in a very long career, Harold Voss had nothing to say. 2:38 a.m. Briggs came through the trauma bay door with a secure laptop and a printed copy of Mitchell's military medical file. 43 pages, partially redacted, with the kind of redactions that were heavy enough to tell you that what was underneath them was significant. Mia took the file without stopping what she was doing, reading while she talked Yoon through the adjusted medication protocol. her eyes moving between the printed pages and the monitors with the rapid triangulation of someone processing multiple data streams simultaneously. Page 12 stopped her. She went back to it, read it again. Her hand, holding the page, did not move. Parker. Reyes had come in behind Briggs and was standing near the door. He had been watching her face. What is it? This injury from 14 months ago, she said. She held up the page. Blast injury, right temporal, treated in field. The field treatment record lists a secondary intervention. She stopped. What? Yun stepped closer. The secondary intervention is listed as performed by a Phoenix-designated medic. Mia set the page down very carefully on the equipment tray. That's not a name, that's a call sign. She looked at Reyes. That's my call sign. Reyes said nothing. I didn't treat him 14 months ago, she said. I was here. I was a nurse in a hospital in Virginia. I hadn't been in the field in 3 years. She looked at the page again. Someone used my call sign on a field treatment record for Ryan Mitchell 14 months ago. The room was quiet except for the monitors. Reyes, she said, her voice was very controlled. Who was on Mitchell's medical support 14 months ago? Reyes's jaw moved. That's above my who, not a question. Not anymore. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him make the decision to tell her, watched him weigh it and come down on the side of truth, which was the decision she had always known Daniel Reyes would eventually make when it mattered. The medic was a woman named Carver, Sarah Carver. She was a former Phoenix unit member who reactivated 18 months ago when the Pentagon rebuilt part of the program. Mia stared at him. Rebuilt part of the program? What does that mean? It means, Reyes stopped, looked at the door, looked back at her. It means when they disbanded your unit 3 years ago, they didn't disband the program. They just rebuilt it without you. Carver, Torres, and Hendricks all reactivated. They've been operational for 18 months. The weight of what he was saying assembled itself in Mia's chest slowly, and then all at once. They rebuilt my unit, she said, without telling me. Mia, they let me think it was over. They let me go off-grid, get a nursing badge, disappear, for 3 years, while they were running operations using my call sign, my protocols, my training methodology. Her voice was still controlled, but the control was costing something now. Did Carr know I didn't know? Reyes's silence was its own answer. Of course he did, she said quietly. A sharp alarm tone cut through the room. Not a medical alarm, something different, something coming from Briggs' laptop. Briggs crossed the room in 3 steps and looked at the screen, and his posture changed in the specific way that posture changes when someone reads something they have been trained to respond to immediately. Contact report, he said. Northern perimeter, 2 vehicles, no plates, parking structure B. Cameras went offline on that structure 4 minutes ago. 2:44 a.m. Everything accelerated. Carr came through the door 30 seconds after Briggs' report, his phone to his ear, speaking in the compressed shorthand of someone coordinating multiple moving pieces. He looked at Mia the moment he entered, and she looked back at him, and whatever conversation they needed to have about what she had just learned existed for 1 second in the space between them and was then set aside, because that conversation could not happen now, and they both knew it. How long until Mitchell can be moved? Carr asked. He can't, Mia said. Not safely. If there's a bleed and you move him before, then we manage it here. He turned to Briggs. Positions. Lockdown floors 2 through 4, all stairwells, service entrance, and the loading dock. Get Cole on the east corridor. I want the OR sealed and a second operator inside it when surgery starts. He looked at Reyes. You're with Parker. I don't need, Mia started. You're with Parker, Carr repeated. This time it was not a discussion. Reyes moved to her side without a word. She did not argue further, because arguing with the operational reality of 2 vehicles with no plates and 4 offline cameras was not a productive use of the next 4 minutes. Dr. Yoon, Carr said, we need to move the patient to an interior room. Trauma Bay 1 has an exterior wall. I can't move him without... Tell me what you need to move him and you'll have it in 3 minutes, Carr said. Yoon looked at Mia. Mia nodded. We can move him if we do it right. I'll manage the neuromonitoring during transport. Yoon, you handle airway. Reyes, she looked at him, you've moved critical patients in field conditions. More times than I want to count, he said. Then you know what to do. 2:51 a.m. They moved Mitchell from Trauma Bay 1 to an interior procedure room on the second floor in 9 minutes and 40 seconds. It was not fast. It was careful, which was the only speed that mattered. Mia kept one hand on the monitoring leads and one eye on Mitchell's face the entire transit, reading the micro expressions of a man who was unconscious, but whose body was still communicating. The slight changes in muscle tension, the shifts in breathing pattern, the things that the monitors showed in numbers, but that her hands and eyes translated into meaning. He was stable. Barely, but stable. The procedure room was smaller, and its single entry point made it defensible, which was the calculation that had driven the decision. While Yoon prepared for the surgical intervention, Mia stood in the corridor outside the room and breathed for the first time in 20 minutes. Reyes stood beside her. The corridor was empty. Carr had cleared it. Somewhere below them, the building was being quietly locked down in the way that only people who know how to do such things quietly can manage. No announcements, no visible panic, just doors that had been opened now closed, and people who had been in certain places now not in those places, and the specific redistribution of human bodies that constitutes a defensive posture. You should have told me, Mia said, not accusing, not angry, just stating a fact that needed to be stated. I know, Reyes said, about the program, about Carver, about all of it. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I wanted to, multiple times. Carr had us under a communication blackout regarding former unit members who had been stood down. If I had contacted you, I know the protocol, she said. I wrote half the protocol. She looked at the closed door of the procedure room. Is Carver still active? Carver is missing, Reyes said. Has been for 11 days. Mia turned to look at him. That's part of what Mitchell was doing. The extraction operation, the asset he was bringing out was connected to the network that we think took Carver. Mitchell was trying to get information on her location. Reyes met her eyes. That's why he ran the extraction personally instead of delegating. Because it wasn't just an asset recovery, it was a lead on one of his own people. Mia stood with that for a moment. The architecture of the situation was rearranging itself in her mind. The pieces she'd had and the pieces she'd been missing, and the shape that emerged when you put them together. Mitchell on that gurney, the compromised operation, the vehicles in the parking structure, Carver missing for 11 days, the rebuilt Phoenix program operating in the shadows of her absence. The people in the parking structure, she said, they're not just here for Mitchell. No, Reyes agreed. They're here because Mitchell was close to finding Carver, and they want to make sure he never finishes the job. Her phone buzzed. Carr. One line. Confirmed 4 hostiles. Parking structure B, moving toward building. ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes. She pushed through the door of the procedure room. Yoon looked up. Cole, standing at the far side of the room, straightened. The monitors showed Mitchell's vitals, holding, fragile, the kind of numbers that were keeping score in a game that had no margin. We have 8 minutes before this building has company, Mia said. Her voice was completely level. Yoon, where are we on the intervention? Prep is done. I need 4 more minutes to... You have 3, Mia said. Do it in 3. Yoon looked at her, then looked at Mitchell, then picked up her instruments. 3 minutes, she said, and something in her voice had shifted. Some residual resistance, some professional friction, and what remained was the clear, focused intensity of someone who had found the gear they needed and shifted into it. Mia moved to the monitoring station. Her eyes went to Mitchell's face. She had not looked at his face, really looked, not medically assessed, but actually looked, since she had seen the tattoo behind his ear in the chaos of the trauma bay, and her entire constructed life had started coming apart at the seams. He looked like a man who had been doing the hardest thing for a very long time. Not just the injury, underneath the injury. It was in the lines around his eyes, in the specific set of his jaw, in the way even in unconsciousness, his hands were partially closed, as if his body had been so long accustomed to holding something, a weapon, a situation, the responsibility for other people's lives, that it had forgotten how to let go. She understood that. She understood it in her bones. 3:02 a.m. The first sound came from the east stairwell. Not loud, a door opening and closing in a way that was too controlled to be casual. The sound of someone who understood that sound carries in empty buildings and was trying to minimize it, and who was good at minimizing it, but not quite good enough. Cole's voice came through Reyes's earpiece. Reyes listened, and Mia watched his face. East stairwell confirmed. Cole has eyes on two of them, ground floor. He looked at her. They're in the building. How? Loading dock, Reyes said. Exactly where you said. Mia closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. In that second, she was not in a hospital. She was in a field operations center running threat assessment the way she had been trained to run it. Not with fear, but with the specific cold clarity that fear sometimes produces in people who have learned to use it as fuel rather than let it become paralysis. She opened her eyes. Yoon, status, 90 seconds, Yoon said, not looking up, her hands moving with the absolute concentration of a physician in the middle of a procedure who has decided that the world outside her hands does not exist until she is done. Mia looked at Reyes. If they find this room, they won't find it for at least 6 minutes, Reyes said. Cole and Briggs are running interference. They'll push them toward the north corridor, away from here. And if they push back? Reyes looked at her steadily. Then they push back. From somewhere below them, muffled by floors and walls, and the institutional concrete of a building that had been built to contain all manner of human emergency, there was a sound. It was brief. It was not a medical sound. It was not an alarm. It was the sound of two groups of people encountering each other in a dark building, and the sound of that encounter being resolved in the fastest way available. Mitchell's monitors alarmed. Mia turned. Yoon pulled her hands back. He's spiking, pressure's climbing. The sound, Mia said. She was already at the monitor. Stimulus response. Even unconscious his body is. He's trained to respond to threat indicators. His physiology is reading the environment. She adjusted the sedation level, watching the numbers, talking under her breath the way she used to talk under her breath in field conditions when there were too many variables and not enough hands. Come on, Mitchell. Easy. The numbers stabilized. Barely. Yoon let out a breath. Done, she said. The intervention is done. She looked at the monitor. He's holding. Reyes's earpiece crackled. He listened. Something crossed his face that Mia read as both relief and the other thing. The thing underneath relief that exists when a situation has been managed but not resolved. Cole has 2 in custody, he said. North corridor, but... He stopped. But, Mia said, 4 confirmed on entry, 2 accounted for. He looked at her. 2 are still in the building. Mitchell's monitor alarmed again. This time it was different. This time it was not a stimulus response. Yoon moved fast, and Mia moved faster, and they were both at the bedside simultaneously, reading the same numbers and arriving at the same conclusion with the different vocabularies of their different training. He's crashing, Yoon said. No, Mia said. He's waking up. Yoon stared at her. His sedation metabolized faster than projected. His system is burning through it. Mia was already reaching for the medication tray, already running the calculation of what you give a man with Mitchell's neurological profile and injury status to bring him back under safely without crashing his blood pressure. He's going to try to pull his leads. Hold his left arm. How do you know he'll... Mitchell's left hand came up off the bed, reaching for the monitoring lead on his chest, with the slow but absolutely purposeful movement of a man whose body had decided, on some level below consciousness, that whatever was attached to him was a liability. Yoon grabbed his arm. He resisted, even sedated, even injured, even with a bleed that had just been surgically addressed. Ryan Mitchell's body pushed back against a restraint with the automatic resistance of someone whose every reflex had been trained towards self-determination. "Colonel," Mia leaned in close. Her voice was low and direct, the way you speak to someone who can't see you, but can hear you. "Colonel Mitchell, my name is Parker. I'm a medic. You're in a secure location. You are not under threat. Stand down." His hand stopped pushing, not because he was unconscious again, because he heard her. His eyes opened. Not all the way. Partway, the specific partial opening of someone climbing through layers of medication and pain and disorientation toward the surface. His eyes were gray and they moved immediately, not randomly, not with the slow sweep of someone waking in a familiar place, but with the fast, targeted movement of someone running an immediate threat assessment of every point in their visual field. They found Mia's face. He looked at her for 3 seconds that felt longer. Then, with the careful, effortful articulation of a man working against significant obstacles to produce specific words, he said, "Phoenix." The room went still. "Is the asset secure?" he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but the words were precise. The words of someone whose priorities had survived everything his body had been through. Mia looked at him. She thought about Reyes's words. The extraction, the asset, Carver missing for 11 days. Everything Mitchell had apparently been trying to do when someone had put him in the ground and left him on a gurney in a civilian hospital with no ID and a covered tattoo. "The asset is secure," she said, because whatever the truth was, this man needed to be still and breathe, and that was the truth that mattered right now. Mitchell's eyes held hers for one more second. Something in them settled, not relief exactly, but the specific release of a weight that has been held for too long. His eyes started to close. Then they opened again, fast, with an urgency that cut through everything. "Carver," he said. Mia's hand on the medication tray stopped moving. "Carver is alive," he said. "I got confirmation before the extraction went wrong. She's alive. But..." His voice was failing, the effort of the words visible on his face, each one costing something he was running low on. "But there's a leak. Inside. Someone inside the program." His eyes closed. The monitors held, stable. Barely, but stable. Mia stood at the bedside of a man she had never met, in a hospital that had fired her, in the middle of a night that had dismantled 3 years of careful invisibility in the span of a few hours. And she stood there with the words "someone inside the program," rearranging everything she thought she understood about why she had been stood down, why her unit had been disbanded, why she had been left to disappear into a Virginia hospital like someone who was meant to be forgotten. Reyes was watching her from across the room. He had heard all of it. "Reyes," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Yeah," he said. The one word carried the weight of everything neither of them was saying yet. "Get car." She did not move from the bedside. She kept her hand near Mitchell's pulse point, not because the monitors weren't doing that job, but because some things you need to feel with your own hands to know are real. His pulse was weak and slow and absolutely present. Somewhere below them, in the sealed and emptied corridors of Mercy General Hospital, 2 people who had come into this building to make sure Ryan Mitchell never finished what he had started were still moving through the dark. And Mia Parker, who had spent 3 years becoming no one, was done being no one. Car arrived in 4 minutes and 30 seconds, which was fast enough that Mia knew he had been close. Not in the conference room, not in the administrative corridor, but somewhere nearby, close enough to respond in under 5 minutes to a summons he had been anticipating. That told her something. It told her he had been waiting for exactly this moment, the moment when Mitchell woke up and started talking, and that he had positioned himself accordingly. She filed that away. He came through the door of the procedure room with Briggs at his shoulder, and he looked first at the monitors, then at Mitchell's face, then at Mia. His expression did what Carr's expressions always did. It moved through several things very quickly, and then settled into the operational neutral that was his default face for situations that required him to manage more variables than he was comfortable admitting to. "He spoke," Carr said. "He did," Mia said. "What did he say?" She looked at him steadily. "He said Carver is alive. He said he got confirmation before the extraction was compromised." She paused. "And he said there's a leak inside the program." The room processed that. Yoon, at the monitoring station, went very still in the way of someone who has just realized that the conversation happening around her has dimensions she was not previously aware of. Cole, at the far wall, did not move, but something in his posture shifted. A tightening that started at his shoulders and moved down. Briggs said nothing. He was watching Carr's face. Mia was watching Carr's face too. She was watching it very carefully, the way she had been trained to watch faces. Not for the expressions people chose to show, but for the ones they failed to suppress in the half-second before their training caught up with them. What she saw in Carr's face in that half-second before his training caught up was not surprise. "You knew," she said. Carr met her eyes. "Mia, you knew there was a leak." She took a step toward him. Her voice was low, controlled, carrying nothing that the people in this room were not authorized to hear, and everything that was necessary. "That's why you came personally. That's why you brought 6 operators instead of calling in a full security detail. A full detail means more people, more channels, more places for information to travel. You kept it small because you didn't know who you could trust." Carr was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time for Carr. "How long have you known?" she asked. "We've had suspicions for 6 weeks, he said. "Confirmed indicators for 11 days. 11 days. Carver had been missing for 11 days. Mia put that together and the shape it made was ugly. "The leak is connected to Carver's disappearance." "We believe so." "And you sent Mitchell into an operation knowing there was a leak in the program?" Her voice had not risen. That was the thing about how she was angry. It didn't expand, it compressed. It got smaller and denser and more precise. "You sent him into a compromised operation." "He went in with that knowledge," Carr said. "He insisted. Carver is his—" He stopped. "His what?" Cole spoke from the far wall quietly. "Carver is his daughter." The room went quiet in a way that rooms rarely go quiet, completely, instantly, as though the air itself had decided to stop moving. Mia turned to look at Cole. He met her eyes and he was not apologizing for the information he had just delivered, because Cole had never once in his life apologized for truth. "Adopted," Cole said, "from when she was 11. She followed him into the program 8 years later. He never told anyone the connection because he didn't want the relationship to affect her operational assignments." Mia stood with that. Sarah Carver, who had used Mia's call sign on a field treatment record, who had been trained in Mia's protocols, who was missing for 11 days and alive, according to the last words of a man who had gone into a burning building to find her. "Why didn't anyone tell me any of this?" she said. The question was directed at Carr, but it was bigger than Carr. It was directed at 3 years of careful silence and deliberate absence, and the accumulated weight of everything she had not been told while she was busy being nobody. "Because you were the only person outside the program that we were certain was clean," Carr said. And there was something in the way he said it that was not strategy. That was something older and more complicated and more personal than strategy. "When we identified the leak indicators 6 weeks ago, The first thing I did was review every person with access to Phoenix program data. And the only person I could rule out with absolute certainty was you, because you'd been off-grid for 3 years, because you hadn't had access, because you were in a hospital in Virginia being a nurse. He looked at her. I needed you clean, Mia. I needed there to be one person in this entire operation who I knew for certain was not the problem, and I needed that person to be you. She heard what he was saying. She understood it intellectually, and she also understood that being preserved as someone's certainty was its own kind of thing that needed to be processed at a different time. The two who are still in the building, she said. Where are they? Briggs answered. Last confirmed position was the second floor service corridor, 7 minutes ago. They've gone quiet. They're waiting, Mia said. They know we have 2 of their people. They're not running, which means they came here for something specific, and they haven't gotten it yet. Mitchell, Cole said. Maybe. Mia looked at the man on the bed, still unconscious now, or close to it. His body had spent everything it had on those 30 seconds of coherence and was now doing the work of recovery with the grim efficiency of a system that had been doing this too many times for too many years. Or the asset. Where is the asset that Mitchell extracted? Carr and Briggs exchanged a look. The look was brief, but it was there, and Mia caught it. Where is the asset, General? In transit to a secure facility, Carr said. Is he clean? The asset, have you verified he wasn't the leak? Another pause, shorter this time but present. Tell me you verified him, Mia said. We're in the process of, General, her voice cracked the air between them like a clean break. If the asset has not been verified and he is the leak, then the people in this building are not here to kill Mitchell. They're here to kill the asset and eliminate the evidence of what Mitchell learned during the extraction. She looked at Briggs. Get on the phone right now and find out where that asset is and whether anyone has eyes on him. Briggs looked at Carr. Carr nodded once. Briggs was on his phone before the nod was complete. 3:19 a.m. Reyes came back into the room from the corridor where he had been monitoring the hallway, and he looked at Mia, and she read his face before he opened his mouth. Someone cut the secondary power feed to this floor, he said. Emergency lighting is running, but the secondary monitoring system for the OR went dark 2 minutes ago. Abrams is still in surgery. He doesn't know yet. They're targeting the medical systems, Mia said. They want to create confusion, movement, people in the corridors. It's working, Reyes said. Park is getting calls from staff on 3 floors. People are asking what's happening. Someone is going to open a door they shouldn't. Lock it down harder, Carr said to Briggs. I have 2 operators on Cole's position, one with Abrams and one on the main stairwell, Briggs said, his phone still at his ear. I'm out of bodies. Mia had already made the calculation before Briggs finished the sentence. She looked at Reyes. He looked at her. They had the brief, wordless exchange of 2 people who had operated together long enough to have a language that didn't require words. I know this building, she said. I know, he said. Every room, every corridor, every maintenance access point and supply route and blind corner. I walked it for 3 years. I know, he said again. If they're moving through the service corridors, there are 2 ways they can reach this room. The north service access in the utility passage behind the east wall of the OR. If we close both of those, how do we close them? Reyes asked. Not challenging, asking. She told him. It was not a complicated plan. The best plans rarely were. It relied on knowing the building better than the people moving through it, and on the specific advantage of defending a position you understood against attackers who were navigating from incomplete information. It relied on Reyes being exactly the person he had always been, and on Mia being, once and finally, the person she had spent 3 years pretending she wasn't. Carr listened to the plan. He said, You're not armed. I know, Mia said. You're a nurse. I was a nurse, she said. As of approximately 90 minutes ago, I'm a terminated nurse. Something moved across Carr's face. It might have been, in a different kind of man, a different kind of night, something like admiration. "Parker, cover Mitchell," she said. She was already moving. 3:24 a.m. The service corridor on the second floor ran the entire length of the building's east wing, and it was not a place that appeared on the public map of the facility. It appeared on the facility's management blueprint, which Mia had found in a maintenance closet on her 4th month as a nurse, when she had been looking for extra gauze, and had instead found a rolled architectural drawing that she had memorized in the way she memorized everything that might one day constitute a tactical advantage. She had told herself, at the time, that she was just being thorough. Reyes moved ahead of her, and she moved behind and slightly to his left, in the position she had always occupied relative to him in tight spaces. The position from which she could cover his blind angle, and he could cover hers, without either of them having to think about it. Their footsteps were quiet, not trained quiet, which has its own sound, but the natural quiet of two people who have spent enough time moving in dangerous places that silence had become their resting state. She heard them before she saw them. 2 sets of footsteps in the cross corridor ahead, moving with the controlled care of professionals who were good, but who did not know this building the way she did not know that the junction 20 feet ahead had a specific acoustic property, a slight concave in the wall created by a structural support that focused and reflected sound. That meant you could hear people approaching from the west side of that junction approximately 8 seconds before you could see them. 8 seconds. She touched Reyes's shoulder. He stopped. He had heard it too. She could tell from the way his body changed, in that specific way it changed when he was processing auditory information. She held up 2 fingers. He nodded. She pointed left, then herself, then right, then him. He nodded again. She moved left. What happened in the next 45 seconds was not something she would ever describe in detail to anyone who was not required by professional necessity to hear it. It was not violent in the dramatic sense. Nobody fired a weapon. Nobody bled. It was the kind of thing that happens when someone with 15 years of close quarters experience and intimate knowledge of the terrain encounters someone without those specific advantages in a confined space. It was over before it was complicated, and then it was over. Both men were down, secured. Reyes had zip ties. Of course he had zip ties. He had always had zip ties. It was one of the constants of the universe, alongside gravity and the fact that Reyes never went anywhere without the 10 things he might need. And within 90 seconds, both men were secured to the heavy pipe mounting on the service corridor wall. Reyes looked at her. "You haven't lost anything," he said. "I know," she said, because she had known, even in the hospital corridor with her firing notice and her scrubs and her $12 ID lanyard, she had always known. You don't lose 15 years of your nervous system. You just cover it up for a while. They were back in the procedure room in 4 minutes. 3:41 a.m. Briggs was off the phone when they returned, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone who has received information that has changed the shape of the situation and is calculating how to present it. He looked at Carr. Carr looked at Briggs. Mia looked at both of them. "The asset," she said. "The asset is secure," Briggs said carefully. "However, Briggs." The asset gave a secondary debrief during transit. In the debrief, he identified the source of the operational compromise. Briggs looked at Carr. Carr's jaw was set. "The source of the leak is not an active field operative." Mia waited. "It's administrative," Briggs said. "Pentagon level." The asset identified a name. He looked at Carr again, and this time the look held something that Mia could not fully read, but that felt like an apology and an alert simultaneously. Carr said the name. Mia did not react. She stood very still, and she let the name land, and she processed what it meant, which was considerable because the name Carr said was not a stranger's name. It was the name of the man who had signed the disbandment order for her unit 3 years ago. The man who had called her into an office with fluorescent lights and a water stain on the ceiling tile and told her that the operation had failed, that the unit was being stood down, that her service was appreciated, that her country was grateful. The man who had apparently been the reason the operation had failed in the first place. "He stood us down," Mia said. Her voice was so controlled it barely sounded like a voice. "He disbanded the Phoenix unit because we were getting close to him." Carr said nothing. 3 years, she said. 3 years of my life. Gone. Because I was doing my job and the person who was supposed to be running the program was... She stopped. Breathed. "Where is he now?" "Being picked up as we speak," Carr said. "Federal custody. The asset's testimony plus the electronic trail the extraction recovered makes it airtight." Mia stood in the middle of the room and breathed. She breathed the way you breathe when a thing that has been sitting in your chest for 3 years, a thing you have been carrying and not naming, and building a different life around, because the weight of it was the only thing you knew how to manage. When that thing suddenly has a shape and an explanation and a culprit. It did not feel like relief. It felt like the specific, complicated thing that exists between grief and fury when they stop being separate and start being the same feeling. Cole said, from the corner, very quietly, "Mia." She looked at him. "He knew it wasn't your fault," Cole said. "Mitchell. He pulled all the documentation when he rebuilt the program. He read everything. He knew what you'd actually done on that operation, and he knew why it failed, and it wasn't you. He had the record officially corrected 14 months ago." Cole paused. "That's why he used your call sign on Carver's field treatment records. Not to hide something, to honor something. He told Carver about you. He told her who you were, and what you'd done and why you were..." His voice caught slightly. "Why you were the standard she was trying to reach." Mia looked at the man on the bed. Ryan Mitchell, who had corrected a record she didn't know was wrong, who had used her name as a standard, who had gone into a compromised operation alone because his daughter was missing and he couldn't send someone else to do the thing that he believed was his to do. She understood that too, more than she wanted to. Mitchell's monitor alarmed. Short, sharp. Yoon moved. Mia moved. Both of them at the bedside, and Mitchell's eyes were opening again. Not with the slow climb of someone emerging from sedation, but with the fast, targeted snap of someone whose body had made a decision. He was more present this time. His eyes found Mia first, found her the way eyes find a thing they are looking for, not the way they stumble across it. "Parker," he said, clearer now. Still rough, still costly, but clear. "I'm here," she said. "Don't move." "Carver..." "We know," she said. "We know she's alive. Carr has a team moving on the intel from your extraction. We know about the leak. It's being handled." His eyes searched her face. He was running an assessment of her credibility, she realized. Even now, even in this state, he was evaluating what she said against what she showed. He was very good at it. She could feel the assessment happening. "You're Phoenix," he said. "I used to be." "No." His voice carried the specific conviction of a man who uses his remaining energy only on things he believes with certainty. "You are." He looked at her for one more second and then closed his eyes again, not losing consciousness, but conserving, doing the disciplined rest of someone who has learned to recover in the spaces between the things that are asked of them. Mia stood at the bedside. She was aware of Carr behind her, and Reyes and Cole and Yoon at the monitors, and the whole weight of the night and everything it had dismantled and everything it had revealed, pressing in from all sides. And then Carr said something she had not expected, from directly behind her, in a voice that had lost its operational register entirely and was something else, something older. "I'm sorry, Mia." She did not turn around. "Not for tonight," he said. "For 3 years ago, for the disbandment, for not fighting harder, for letting you disappear when I should have..." He stopped. "I should have told you the truth. All of it," Much sooner. The procedure room was very quiet. "Are you sorry?" she said. "Or are you sorry because you need me, and it's more efficient to be sorry right now?" A pause. "Both," he said. "Is that honest enough?" It was, actually. It was the most honest thing he had said to her all night, and it landed differently than an apology that cost nothing. "The two in the service corridor are secured," she said. "They'll need medical attention in about 4 hours when their adrenaline drops. Tell Park." She stepped back from the bedside. "Yoon, what does he need for the next 8 hours?" Yoon walked her through it methodically. Medications, monitoring parameters, the specific thresholds that would require immediate intervention versus watchful management. Mia listened with the full attention of someone who would be accountable for every piece of information being given to her. Yoon finished and then looked at her and said, with the directness of a physician who has shed the last of her professional caution, "You should have been doing this all along." "I know," Mia said. At 4:07 a.m., Harold Voss appeared in the doorway of the procedure room. Nobody had summoned him. He had come on his own, which was, Mia thought, possibly the most surprising thing that had happened in an exceptionally surprising night. He looked smaller than he had in the trauma bay. Not physically. Physically, he was the same silver-haired, broad-shouldered man who had thrown her into a supply cart and fired her in front of her colleagues. But whatever the trauma bay had contained, the certainty, the authority, the absolute conviction that the room belonged to him was gone. He looked at Mia. He looked at Mitchell on the bed. He looked at the monitors, which showed numbers that were, by any clinical measure, a great deal better than they should have been, given what this man had been through tonight. Then he looked at Mia again. "I'd like to apologize," he said. The room waited. Mia looked at him. She thought about the metal supply cart and the sound it made when she hit it. She thought about the hallway and the termination notice and his finger 1 inch from her face. She thought about Trevor Chen's expression, the residents frozen, Janet Hale stepping back. She thought about what it cost to be publicly diminished in a place where your reputation was the foundation of your ability to do the work you cared about. "Dr. Voss," she said. Her voice was completely even. "I don't accept your apology." He blinked. "Not because I'm angry," she said. "I am angry, but that's not why. I don't accept it because an apology requires that the person receiving it believe the person giving it understands what they're apologizing for. And I don't believe that. Not tonight." She held his gaze. "You didn't fire me because I broke protocol. You fired me because I was right, and you couldn't tolerate that in front of an audience. Those are different things. When you understand the difference, the real difference, not the version of it that's comfortable, then we can have a different conversation." Voss stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he nodded once and left. Cole exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, but in the quiet of the room it carried. "I like her," he said to Reyes. "Yeah," Reyes said. "We all do." 4:15 a.m. Carr came to stand beside her near the monitoring station. The room had settled into the particular rhythm of a crisis that has found its floor. Not over, not resolved, but contained. Yoon was running her careful assessments. Reyes and Cole were positioned at the door. Briggs was on a call that, by its length and tone, seemed to be the long administrative tale of a federal operation, wrapping up the things that needed wrapping. "The Pentagon wants a formal debrief," Carr said low. "Tomorrow, full review of tonight's events, the operational compromise, the assets testimony." He paused. "They're going to want to discuss your status." "My status," Mia said. "Your reinstatement, full rank restoration, back pay from disbandment date." He looked at her sideways. "And an official record correction. Everything that was attributed to unit failure 3 years ago is being redocumented with accurate causation." Mia watched Mitchell's monitors. The numbers held. He breathed his slow, effortful, absolutely present breaths. "There's a condition," she said. "I assumed there would be. I want to be embedded with his team. She looked at Carr. Mitchell's team, when he recovers, when Carver is found and brought back. I want to be their medic. She paused. Not a consultant, not a temporary attachment. Embedded. Permanent. Carr looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Mitchell, then back at her. He's going to have opinions about that. I know, she said. I'm counting on it. The monitor beside Mitchell's bed showed a heart rate of 58 beats per minute. Steady, persistent, the heartbeat of a man who had been in a great deal of trouble tonight and had come out the other side. In the corridor outside, 2 men were secured to a pipe and waiting for the morning to come down on them. In a federal transport vehicle somewhere on a Virginia highway, an asset was talking. In Washington, a man with enough stars on his shoulders to fill a room was being walked out of a building by people whose faces would not appear in any photograph. And in a second-floor procedure room in Mercy General Hospital, Mia Parker stood beside the bed of a man she had never met and had already saved twice. And she felt, for the first time in 3 years, that she was standing in the right place. Not a nurse, not a nobody, not a carefully maintained disappearance. Phoenix. She was still Phoenix. The debrief was scheduled for 9 a.m. It was 4:47 a.m., which meant Mia had 4 hours and 13 minutes in which the world was going to ask nothing of her, and she did not know what to do with that. She did what she had always done in the spaces between the things that were asked of her. She worked. Yoon had gone to check on Abrams in the OR, whose bowel resection had finished at 4:30, and who had emerged from the operating room into a second floor that looked nothing like the second floor he had entered 3 hours earlier. Cleared corridors, federal operators at the stairwell doors, a general in the administrative suite, and his colleague, Dr. Yoon, with a specific expression of someone who had experienced a significant personal and professional recalibration in a single night. Abrams had taken all of this in, asked 3 questions, received answers that satisfied none of them, and gone to write his post-op notes in an office at the far end of the building, which was the most sensible response available to him. Mia sat beside Mitchell's bed with his chart open in her hands, and she went through it the way she went through everything, completely, methodically, reading not just the numbers and the clinical notations, but the story underneath them. 15 years of service in the record, 12 documented injuries, 3 of which should have ended a career and hadn't. 8 commendations, 4 of which were classified at a level that meant the commendation itself was classified. The kind of record that described a man who had decided, a very long time ago, that the distance between himself and the thing he was protecting was the only measurement that mattered. She thought about what Cole had said, that Mitchell had corrected her record, that he had told Carver about her, that her name had been used not to erase something, but to honor it. She turned to page 31 of the chart, the field treatment record from 14 months ago, the one with her call sign. She read it carefully this time, not with the shock of recognition, but with the attention of someone doing the work. Sarah Carver, whoever she was, wherever she was right now, had done a good job. The clinical decisions were sound, the documentation was precise, and in the margins of the treatment record there was a single handwritten note in different ink, added later, that read, "As trained, Phoenix Protocol saved his life." Mia sat with that for a while. At 5:12 a.m., Mitchell woke up for the 3rd time. This time he woke up differently. Not the emergency surface of the first 2 times, not the urgent climb through sedation towards something he needed to say. He woke up slowly and with the particular deliberate quality of someone choosing to return to consciousness, making the decision rather than having it made for them. His eyes opened and he looked at the ceiling for a moment, running whatever internal assessment he ran in the first seconds of waking in an unfamiliar place. Then he turned his head carefully and looked at Mia. She was already looking at him. "You're still here," he said. "I'm still here," she agreed. He took a slow breath. His face moved through several things, the cataloging of his physical state, the reconstruction of the sequence of events that had produced this moment, and something underneath both of those that was harder to name. "How bad?" he asked. "You had a secondary bleed. Dr. Yoon addressed it around 3 a.m. Your neuro presentation is cleaner than it has any right to be, given your history of TBI. She paused. "You're going to need real rest. Weeks, not days." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Tell me about the operation." "The asset is secure and talking. The 4 hostiles are in custody. The source of the leak has been identified and is in federal custody as of approximately 4 a.m. She watched his face process each piece of information. "It's handled." "Carver," he said. His voice did not change when he said it, but his eyes did. "Carr has a team moving on the location data from the asset's debrief. They went dark 40 minutes ago, which in this context means they're active." He was quiet for a moment. "She's good," he said. "She's the best medic I've had in 15 years. She's better than—" He stopped. "She's better than I let her know." "Tell her that when she gets back," Mia said. "I will." He looked at her with the direct, unflinching attention of a man who had learned to look at things straight because looking at them sideways cost more time than he usually had. "Carr told you about what I did. The record correction, her training. Cole told me." He absorbed that. "Are you angry?" She considered the question honestly, the way it deserved. "No," she said. "I think I would have been 6 hours ago, before tonight." She looked at the chart in her hands. "Now I needed to know it wasn't what they said it was. I needed to know that what happened 3 years ago wasn't because I failed." She looked up at him. "And now I know. So I'm not angry. I'm something else. I'm still figuring out what." Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. "Carr told me he was going to find you," he said. "He told me 2 months ago when we confirmed the leak indicators. He said he had one person he was certain about and he was going to bring her back in." A pause. "I didn't know it would be like this." "Like what?" "Like you'd be the one keeping me alive while we sorted everything else out." She set the chart down. "How did you know my call sign? When you woke up the first time, you said Phoenix before I said anything." "Because you caught a dosage error at distance in a chaotic trauma bay and then held your ground against Voss until they physically removed you," he said. "Carr told me that part on the phone. I knew what that was." He held her gaze. "I'd been told what you looked like and who you were, but I didn't need any of that. The way you worked, anyone who'd worked with Phoenix-trained personnel would have known." Mia looked at her hands, the hands that had stopped Trevor Chen's wrist, that had been steady in the service corridor, that had adjusted sedation levels and read monitors and held the chart of this man's entire professional life for the last hour and a half. "I want to be embedded with your team," she said, "when you recover, when Carver is back." He did not look surprised. "Carr mentioned it, and I want to hear it from you." His voice was even, and his eyes were fully alert now. She realized, being assessed again, the way he had assessed her earlier, reading what she showed against what she said. Not because Carr thinks it's a good idea, not because it solves a problem. Why do you want it? She thought about 3 years of quiet, the orange plastic chairs in the family waiting area, the night shifts in the $12 lanyard, and the careful invisibility of a life built to be survivable rather than meaningful. She thought about the moment in the stairwell when she had dialed a number she hadn't used in 3 years and given her authentication code in a voice that was steadier than she felt. She thought about the service corridor and Reyes at her left and the specific rightness of moving through a dangerous space with someone who knew exactly where she would be. "Because this is what I'm for," she said. Not with drama, not with the inflation of someone making a statement, just with the simple, direct certainty of someone who has spent a long time knowing a thing and is finally saying it out loud. "I was built for this. I spent 3 years trying to be something else, and I was competent at it, and it cost me everything it cost. and I would do it all again because it kept me clean long enough to be here tonight. But I'm done now. I'm done being no one. Mitchell held her gaze. Then he said, "You were never no one. You were just waiting." The monitor beside him showed 56 beats per minute, steady, present. "You have the job," he said. 5:51 a.m. Carr came back through the door at 5:51 with the energy of someone who has been on the phone for the last 45 minutes and has arrived at the end of a series of conversations that have produced a result. Mia read his face when he entered, and what she read there made her stand up from the chair. "Carver?" she said. "Recovered," Carr said. 05:37 local time. The team extracted her from a facility in Loudoun County. She's injured, broken radius, 2 cracked ribs, mild hypothermia, but she's talking and she's stable, and she is, by all accounts, a pause that was almost a smile, furious, which her team medic assures us is a very good sign. Mia sat back down, not from weakness, from the specific physical release of a tension that has been held so long the body doesn't know what to do when it goes. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and breathed. Mitchell had heard everything. His eyes were closed, but the change in his breathing was unmistakable. She watched his chest rise and fall, and she watched the thing that a man's body does when the weight it has been carrying for 11 days suddenly no longer needs to be carried. It was quiet, and it was enormous, and she looked away to give him whatever privacy that moment deserved. Reyes appeared in the doorway behind Carr. He looked at Mia. She gave him one nod. He turned his face slightly to the side, and for a moment Daniel Reyes, who had cracked exactly 0 emotional reactions in the 6 hours she had known him in this current version of their relationship, pressed his jaw together hard and looked at a point on the wall that contained nothing. Then he looked back at her and said, "Good." One word. It was enough. 6:14 a.m. Janet Hale found Mia in the nurse's locker room at 6:14. Mia was sitting on the bench with her jacket across her knees and her phone in her hand and the termination notice that Voss had left on this same bench 6 hours ago, still sitting where he'd placed it, untouched. Janet sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "You knew," Janet said finally, "from the beginning, the moment they brought him in." "I recognize the tattoo," Mia said. "And before that, the way you watched that bay, the way you read his presentation." Janet looked at her. 2 years and 7 months. I trained you. I watched you work every shift. And I never—" She stopped. "I should have known." "You knew what I needed you to know," Mia said. "That's not a criticism. That was the point." "The 3 scars," Janet said. "On his arm. I looked, like you said." "I know you did. I almost called it in through normal channels, and then I thought—" Janet paused. "I thought about the way you said it, the way you always say things, like you've already calculated every downstream consequence, and you're just telling me the summary." She looked at the termination notice. "Are you leaving?" Mia looked at the notice. She picked it up. She held it for a moment, this piece of paper that represented 2 years and 7 months of a life she had built deliberately and maintained carefully, and that had served its purpose and was now finished. She folded it once, set it down. "Yes," she said, "I'm leaving." Janet nodded. Something moved across her face that was not surprise and not quite grief. It was the particular expression of someone who has suspected an ending for a while and is now watching it arrive. "Were you happy here?" she asked. "Any of it, were you?" "Some of it," Mia said, and she meant it. Some shifts, some patience, some nights when it was quiet and the work was just the work, and it was enough. She looked at Janet. "You were good to me. This place was good to me in the way it knew how to be. That matters." Janet straightened her scrubs in the way she straightened her scrubs when she was managing something and not letting it manage her. "That general," she said, "he's going to take care of you? The Pentagon or whatever, they're going to—" "I'm going to take care of me," Mia said. That's the lesson from the last 3 years. I'm the one who does that. Janet looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up, smoothed her scrubs one more time and said, "You are the best nurse I ever had." She paused. "Even if that's not what you are." Mia watched her go. 7:30 a.m. The debrief was pushed to 10 a.m. to allow for Carver's medical evaluation and transport, which gave Mia 2.5 hours in which she sat in the conference room with Carr and a man from the Pentagon's Inspector General office named Whitfield, who had the face of someone who investigated things professionally and had long ago stopped being surprised by what he found. She told him everything. From 1:34 a.m. to the service corridor to Mitchell's bedside to Voss in the doorway. She told it in the order it happened and with the precise, detailed recall of someone whose memory had been trained to function as documentation. Whitfield typed. Carr listened. Occasionally, Whitfield asked a clarifying question, and Mia answered it. When she reached the part about the termination notice, Whitfield stopped typing. He looked at Carr. Carr looked at the table. "Doctor, Voss's conduct tonight," Whitfield said carefully, "is going to be subject to a separate review by the hospital board and, given the federal patient jurisdiction, potentially by this office as well." "That's between you and Voss," Mia said. "I don't need a review to tell me what happened." "No," Whitfield agreed. "I imagine you don't." He looked at his notes. "For the record, Nurse Parker, your actions tonight directly prevented the death of a decorated active duty officer, enabled the identification and apprehension of 4 hostile operatives, and contributed materially to the recovery of an active intelligence asset." He paused. "Also, for the record, your termination notice will be voided as part of the federal jurisdiction documentation. Legally, it never happened." Mia thought about that, about the difference between a thing never happening and a thing happening and then being erased. They were not the same thing, and the distinction mattered to her, but she understood that the paper version of reality had its own logic, and she did not need to argue with it right now. "What I need," she said, "is a different document. My reinstatement orders, full rank, the record correction, and my assignment to Colonel Mitchell's unit in writing before I walk out of this building." Whitfield looked at Carr. "All of that will be processed today," Carr said. "You have my word." "I had your word 3 years ago," she said. "Not bitterly, just factually. I'd like the paperwork." Carr almost smiled. "You'll have the paperwork." 9:22 a.m. Mia was in the corridor outside the procedure room when she heard her name. Not Parker, not Phoenix, her name. She turned, pushing a wheelchair, slowly, carefully, with the specific caution of someone whose body is currently disagreeing with their level of activity, but who has decided to proceed anyway, was Sarah Carver. She was 26 years old. She had her father's gray eyes and none of his stillness. Her face was the face of someone who felt things near the surface, and had learned to work with that rather than against it, which was its own kind of strength. Her right arm was in a temporary cast. There were bruises on her jaw and her neck that Mia assessed automatically and medically without meaning to. She was in a hospital gown, and she had clearly fought the wheelchair and lost, and was occupying it under protest. Beside her, walking at her left and watching her with the expression of someone who has recently received very good news after 11 days of very bad news, was Thomas Cole. Carver stopped the wheelchair 6 feet from Mia. She looked at her, just looked, for a long moment, with those gray eyes that were her father's eyes. The same assessment, the same direct quality, the same way of looking at something straight. "You're Phoenix," Carver said. "I'm Mia," Mia said. "He told me about you." A pause. "My dad. He talked about you like—" She stopped. Something moved across her face that was complicated and young and real. "He talked about you like you were the reason the program was worth anything, like you had set the standard before he even got there, and everything that came after was just trying to catch up." Mia looked at this young woman, injured, exhausted, 11 days of captivity sitting in the lines around her eyes, and felt something move through her chest that she did not try to name or contain. "How are you?" Mia asked. "Broken arm, ribs. They tell me I'm fine." "You're not fine," Mia said. "You'll be fine. Those are different things." Carver looked at her for a moment, and then something in her face shifted, the composed, professional surface cracking just slightly at the edge. "I used your call sign," she said, "on his treatment record, because he was dying and I needed to think about someone who would know what to do. And the only person I could think of was..." She stopped. "I don't know if that was okay." "It was okay," Mia said. "I used your protocols." "I know, you did them correctly." Carver sat with that for a moment. "Cole says you're joining the team." "That's the plan." "Good." She said it with the simple, flat certainty of someone who means exactly one thing and has said it precisely. Then she looked down at her cast and back up. "I'm going to need a few weeks." "Take the time," Mia said. "We'll be there when you're ready." Cole was watching Mia from Carver's left side with the expression he had worn most of the night, the expression of someone watching a thing resolve that has been unresolved for too long. He met her eyes and did not say anything, which was the Cole version of saying everything. 10:47 a.m. Mitchell's room was quiet when Mia entered for the last time before the debrief formally concluded, and the day became the machinery of reports and documentation and official processes. He was awake. He had been awake, she suspected, for a while. His eyes had the quality of someone who had been thinking, not someone who had just surfaced. "She came to see you," he said, not a question. "She did." "And?" "She's going to be fine," Mia paused. "She used my protocols correctly under pressure with inadequate equipment. She kept you alive. She's going to be more than fine." Something in his face did the thing that faces do when relief and pride combine into a single expression that doesn't have a name. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "I'm told you have your assignment. Carr is processing the paperwork." "I already signed it," Mitchell said. "My authorization, your embedded assignment. I signed it at 9:15 from this bed, which is not ideal, but legal." He paused. "Welcome to the team." Mia stood at his bedside for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the building, the morning shift was arriving. Nurses and residents and orderlies, and the whole ordinary machinery of a hospital beginning its day, unaware or only partially aware of what the night had contained. Gerald Park was probably writing a very unusual incident report. The orange plastic chairs in the family waiting area were probably already occupied by people who had been called in the night about someone they loved. It was a hospital. People brought their worst moments here and trusted the building to help them survive it. She had understood that for 2 years and 7 months, and she still understood it, and she would carry that understanding with her out the door. "I have one more thing to do before I leave," she said. He nodded, which meant he already knew or suspected what it was. 11:15 a.m. The nursing station on the 3rd floor was the same as it had always been. The same lights, the same counter, the same slightly broken chair that everyone had been meaning to replace for the entire time she'd worked here. 3 nurses were at the station. 2 she knew well, and 1 she had worked alongside for 18 months without learning much about. All 3 looked up when she appeared. She stood at the counter and she looked at each of them. "I'm not coming back," she said. "You deserve to hear that clearly and not through a memo. What happened here last night, the way it was handled, the way some of you had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting yourselves, that's not your fault. And most of you made the right choice when it mattered. I want you to know I saw that." She looked at the 2 she knew well. Marcus, who had taken 3 extra shifts when she needed cover and never asked why. And Dana, who had brought her coffee at 3 a.m. on the hard nights and never made it into a big gesture. "You were good colleagues," she said. "This was good work. It mattered." She turned to leave. Marcus said, "Were you really a SEAL medic?" She looked back at him. "Something like that. And you just, what, worked here? For 3 years?" "I worked here," she said. "That part was real. Everything I did in this building was real. I was never pretending to care about the work. I was just doing two things at once. Being two people at once." She paused. "It's exhausting. I don't recommend it." Dana said quietly, "Are you going somewhere better?" Mia thought about the Black Hawk in the parking lot, about Reyes and Cole, and a woman named Sarah Carver with a broken arm and gray eyes who had used her name as a standard, about a man in a hospital bed who had corrected a record she didn't know was wrong and given her back something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. "Yes," she said, "I'm going somewhere better." She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. 12:03 p.m. The Black Hawk was on the roof. Not the parking lot this time. The roof, which was cleaner and faster, and had always been the option for people who knew what they were doing and were no longer trying to be subtle about it. Reyes was already on board. Briggs was running the final pre-flight communication. Cole was standing at the rooftop access door when Mia came through it, holding it open for her with the particular courtesy of someone who had been waiting and was not making a production of it. She stopped at the door. The morning air was cold and sharp and full of the sound of the rotors beginning to spin. Her jacket was on. Her badge was gone, surrendered to Gerald Park at 11:58, along with her key card and her locker combination. All of it handled with the quiet efficiency of someone who knows exactly how to close a chapter. She looked at Cole. "How's your arm?" she asked. He looked confused for half a second. Then, "That's Carver's arm." "I know," she said. "I'm asking about yours. Left shoulder. You've been favoring it since I got here." He looked at her, then at his shoulder, then back at her. "Old injury," he said. "It acts up sometimes." "I know," she said. "I noticed it at 2 a.m. You should have it looked at before we go operational." Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Reyes through the open Black Hawk door and said, loudly enough to be heard over the rotors, "She's already working." Reyes from inside, "She never stopped." Mia walked past Cole and climbed into the Black Hawk. She sat across from Reyes, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and they said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said in this moment that they had not already said or would not have time to say later. The door closed. The rotors hit full speed. As the Black Hawk lifted from the roof of Mercy General Hospital and banked north over the Virginia morning, Mia Parker looked out, and she did not look back. Not because the last 3 years had meant nothing. They had meant something real, and she would carry them. But because the direction of her life had been reestablished, and she was not someone who looked backward when she knew exactly where she was going. She had walked into this building as a nurse, quiet, careful, built to disappear. She was leaving it as Phoenix, and Phoenix had never once in her entire life disappeared when the work needed doing. She looked forward. The morning was wide and cold and full of everything that came next. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly right.